It's a great pleasure to welcome you to the 2016 Tralac Annual Conference. As many of you would know, the Tralac Annual Conference has become known as a very important forum for very frank debate about trade and regional integration issues for Southern Africa, but also for the broader African region. And it's a great pleasure to welcome today Tralac board members, members of the diplomatic community, honorable judges from the Comesa Court of Justice, the registrar and colleagues from the court, the African Union Commission, regional secretariats, government departments, and representatives from a range of non-state organizations, the private sector, business associations, academics, and representatives of civil society organizations like Tralac. We also would very much like to thank our Namibian partners, the Namibia Trade Forum, and Dita Ngipondoko Robiati and her team, because I think, as we all know, organizing a party at home is a lot easier than going elsewhere to organize an event such as this. Without Ndita and her team, we would not literally have been able to hold this conference in Namibia. We are also extremely pleased to welcome our development partners, USAID, and we'll have opening remarks from Marcus Dousis, the USAID representative in Namibia. And we'd also like to thank the Swedish International Development Agency, SIDA. SIDA and USAID are co-funding the Tralac Annual Conference. Without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Marcus Dousis to make opening remarks for the conference.
It is my pleasure to join you today for the opening of the Trade Law Center's Tralac's Annual Conference. The United States government, through the U.S. Agency for International Development, is very proud to support the efforts of Tralac, an independent civil society organization and prominent think tank on trade issues. I'm very happy to see so many of our Namibian and regional partners here for the event, and I'm looking very much forward to a lively discussion. An important cross-cutting theme of the conference involves measures to ensure regulatory coherence and consistency in order to improve interregional trade. Improving trade flows in Southern Africa is essential to promoting economic growth, creating jobs, and increasing the standard of living for individuals who work so very hard, from the truck driver who ferries goods across the borders to the farmers and fledgling manufacturers who are helping to build exports throughout the region. Through various regional, national, and cross-cutting initiatives, the U.S. government is working with Namibia and other countries in the region to reduce the costs of doing business, improve the investment climate, encourage adoption of the latest trade facilitation tools, and foster improved trade protocols and customs optimization. One example of this is our support that we've provided to SADC through USAID's Southern Africa Trade Hub initiative in developing the Trade Facilitation Program. This program outlines a harmonized approach to SADC's member states to use as a blueprint to help meet the recommendations of the World Trade Organization's Agreement on Trade Facilitation. The program is based on 4 principles: transparency, predictability, simplification, and cooperation, and uses a 5-year timeline to prioritize activities with realistic timelines for each activity. The document covers 27 trade-related activities, such as the web-based national single window, trade information portals, appeals procedures, and an interregional transit management system. Successful implementation of the Trade Facilitation Program will help to expedite interregional trade among member states, eliminate duplication of effort and investment by enhancing donor coordination, enable the region to take greater advantage of the benefits of the United States African Growth and Opportunity Act, AGOA. as well as encourage foreign direct investment and lead to a greater industrialization of Southern Africa. Another important topic of today's program is standards compliance. The United States government, through USAID's Trade Hub, has provided countries in the region with technical assistance and capacity building support to enhance each country's standardization process and to improve the effectiveness of their technical barriers to trade inquiry points in line with the World Trade Organization's agreement. Namibia is the 7th SADC country in the past 2 years to be supported by the US government on standards to meet its commitment to the WTO agreement. The Trade Hub has already assisted Botswana, Lesotho, Malawi, Mozambique, Swaziland, and Zambia. In Namibia, the US government partnered with Namibia's Ministry of Finance and Customs and Excise to develop and launch a powerful, cutting-edge tool to increase and facilitate cross-border trade. The Namibia Trade Information Portal is a web-based platform that provides an authoritative one-stop shop of readily accessible trade, customs, and compliance information. It significantly reduces the time and effort required for local and international traders to access current information and documentation required for doing business. The portal is the culmination of many years of collaboration between the government of the Republic of Namibia, agencies and ministries, and the US government. Namibia's Trade Information Portal development is also an important step towards realizing the larger goal of developing a national single window for Namibia. The US government is working closely with Namibia to connect all stakeholders in a single electronic data information exchange platform that will substantially reduce time and the cost of trade. This platform is an online tool that will allow any individual or business involved in trade and transport to submit all required paperwork electronically via a single online site. The National Single Window provides traders with a single entry point to lodge standardized information to fulfill all of the important export and transit-related regulatory requirements. The net result is an easier, faster, and less expensive cross-border trade and to improve business opportunities. Other countries that have implemented a national single window have succeeded in reducing customs processing from several days to less than 90 seconds. The US government is working closely with the Namibian government to make the national single window a reality, and the results should be impressive. For example, when Ghana introduced a national single window, customs revenue increased by 50% in the first year, while the time and cost of exporting goods shrank by 65%. We are happy to support efforts towards realizing a national single window, a key feature of Namibia's overall e-government strategy. I would like to congratulate the government of the Republic of Namibia and the other governments and partners represented here for their recent achievements in improving the enabling environment for trade. I look forward to our strong ongoing partnership and collaboration as Namibia and the Southern African region continues their progress towards the next level of trade competitiveness. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Marcus, for reminding us of what trade and regional integration in our part of the world really needs. A practical agenda for facilitating cross-border economic activities, whether they be investment, production, trade, or indeed consumption. And the kind of initiatives that the USAID, Trade Hub, and other organizations are engaged in. This is very much in sync with the overall theme of this year's annual conference and the specific focus areas that we will have in the various sessions of our deliberations today and tomorrow. Our theme this year, towards rules-based governance in African trade and integration, is a very broad canvas. What we'd like to do is to move from the broad political statements of commitments to regional integration and the commitments to rules-based governance, but to see what it actually means in practice. So in a sense, this conference aims to move the debate and discussion from broad generalities with which we all agree to some of the specific challenges and issues that matter as Africa seeks to integrate, as investors, producers, traders seek to find economic opportunities that involve cross-border activities. This means that we are now discussing the kind of detail that we hope will feature very prominently in the debates around Africa's most ambitious integration initiative, the Continental Free Trade Area. Very recently, the member states of the African Union have gathered to start the negotiations process to conclude expeditiously a continent-wide free trade area. Meanwhile, negotiations to conclude the tripartite free trade area still continue. Reflecting on the lessons of regional integration initiatives in our regional economic communities, SACU, SADC, Marcus has referred to, and of course the many others on the continent, as well as the tripartite FTA negotiations, should make us think about the kind of agenda that we're shaping for continental integration. The broad statements are important. The commitments to rules-based governance and to integration are important, but the devil is in the detail. And I think this is really where this conference would like to make a contribution to a more detailed debate about issues such as standards, to which Marcus has referred, customs and border management issues, dispute resolution, who would have access to dispute resolution fora, for example, and on what terms. Now, it is also true that we're all familiar in broad terms with the challenges we face in Africa, the challenges of integration. But taking a look at some of the practical implications, moving from the theoretical discussion of regional integration and the challenges that Africa faces, to a practical agenda, is a very, very difficult task. To share with you some practical experience in terms of organizing this conference. Participants traveling from African countries to Namibia via South Africa require a transit visa. Visitors from South Africa now, for example, require a business visa to come to attend or to make a presentation at a conference in Namibia. Movement of people is a very, very sensitive issue. But it is true that Africa cannot integrate unless we find appropriate regulatory pathways and we implement those regulations effectively and efficiently. Africa will not be able to integrate. In other areas of regulation, whether it be standards, customs and border procedures, and so on, we also see challenges which cut across regulatory disciplines. Regulation is, of course, extremely important. The agreements that our governments negotiate and sign and ratify are extremely important. This is the fabric of rules-based governance. But when one takes a look at the rationale for regulation, the objectives, the aims of regulation, we recognize Legitimate public policy objectives feature very prominently, obviously, when we consider those objectives. But we also recognize that in some cases, regulation may have other intent. And when it comes to trade and regional integration, the protectionist intent sometimes trumps effective, appropriate regulatory intervention. This is a great pity. It's also important to keep in mind that the true costs of regulation are really, really difficult to assess. So regulatory impact assessments, which many countries are now doing, really find it difficult to calculate, to count, to estimate even the true cost of regulations. Because the impact of regulation is dispersed and diffuse. The number of hours that you and I take to complete visa application forms. We have to go to the banks to get stamped statements, wait in queues for hours and hours. If we had to calculate the true cost of that kind of regulatory intervention, then the cost-benefit analysis may look very, very different to what may be assumed at this stage. So what we hope to do today and tomorrow is to focus on what we can call the practice of regional integration and come to grips with some of these specific problems that we face in our part of the world. Integration is not an easy task in Africa. Problem of diversity is enormous. We're looking at least developed countries like Lesotho, small countries like Namibia, population of just over 2 million. And we're looking at large countries, far more developed and diversified countries. Integrating unequal partners is a daunting task, but it can be overcome, If we look, for example, at one of the recently concluded mega-regional trade agreements, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, after 7 years of negotiations, partners as diverse as the United States and Vietnam have all bought into a particular rules-based paradigm of trade governance. And they have accommodated some of the challenges that the smaller countries like Vietnam will encounter in terms of giving effect to the commitments undertaken in that agreement. Just as an example, the implementation timeframes for tariff liberalization extend beyond 20, 25 years for some products. Not many, but for some. This is the kind of variable geometry which would make sense in an African context too. But the important point, it has to be rules-based. Unfettered discretion defies the fundamental principles of rules-based governance. CFTA negotiations, very briefly, as I've said, have just got underway. We still have an opportunity to shape a modern 21st century integration instrument through those negotiations. But there are lessons to be learned from our other regional economic communities and specifically also from the tripartite free trade area negotiations, which are still underway. We've seen that in all of our integration endeavors and negotiations, tariff liberalization and rules of origin, those two disciplines that hang very closely together in terms of the management of cross-border trade, have proven to be exceptionally sensitive. In fact, those negotiations are still underway in the tripartite free trade area. And in other regional economic communities, the free trade areas which have been launched are still very much work in progress as far as those issues are concerned. Is it possible, therefore, to look at a design and architecture of the CFTA which permits a new approach, which would allow us to make progress in areas that are less contentious? And here again, examples from the tripartite free trade area are instructive. Number of annexes on standards, non-tariff barriers, customs and border management have been completed. Those are not as contentious as the tariff and related issues. Is it possible for us to proceed in those areas where it is much easier to make progress? What should therefore be the design, the architecture of this agreement? And this is where we come to the technical details that really matter. How should that set of negotiations be sequenced? It would make sense, I would think, to start with the non-contentious issues. Let's have preparatory work on the more contentious tariff liberalization and rules of origin. But let's make progress in the negotiations where progress is possible. In terms of design, architecture, the structure, the legal issues that matter, how can we make space for the entry into force of the legal instruments on those issues, such as standards, for example, that could enter into force before other disciplines of trade and integration? As my colleagues at tralac often remind me, the law is an instrument. It's not an end in itself. Let's keep the end in mind when we debate issues that can take our regional integration agenda forward, and make sure we design, we sequence, we support our negotiations to make progress that can truly assist Africa to integrate, not only amongst ourselves, but also into the global economy.